Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Ignite SAR Academy community event, Defenders Tabletop, Investigating Backdoors and Breaches. Today's session is all about learning how to think like a defender, ask better questions, and work through an incident from the attacker's analyst point of view. Whether you are new to cybersecurity or already working in the field, tabletop exercises are a powerful way to practice decision-making, communication, and investigating skills in a safe and collaborative environment. I'm very excited here to introduce our guest facilitator, Ms. Robin Noyes. Robin is a security leader, educator, and mentor who brings a strong passion for helping people learn, grow, and build confidence in security. Today, she'll guide us through an interactive tabletop style investigation using the backdoors and breaches approach, where we'll explore clues, discuss possible attack paths, and think through what defenders should do next. Robin, thank you so much for sharing your time and experience with our community. We're excited to learn from you. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And before I start, I'll give a little bit information about my background as your facilitator, but I also want to make sure that it's understood. I am not associated with Black Hills. I did not create the game. I'm just an awesome fan and think it's a great learning tool. But my background is over 20 years in the information assurance, information security, cybersecurity, with multiple certifications, masters, and I'll be able to share some links if folks would like to play the online version of the game, as well as the Steam tabletop version of the game. Now, with Steam tabletop version, it is a community-built game, but you must own the base game called Tabletop Simulator. So first, we're going to go through the basic rules of the game. It is kind of like cards meets Dungeons and Dragons meets dice, right? It's a combination of the three, but it's highly interactive and really depends upon communicating your ideas and suggestion, and it's very much a team focused game. So you have to everybody speak up. Don't think that any answer is a wrong answer. You may have some insights or a particular view on the event we're going to look at that maybe someone else hasn't thought of. So there is no wrong answer. So go ahead and suggest it. So in the game, there are 52 cards in the base game deck. They're going to include your initial compromise, your C2 and exfil, your persistence, your pivot and escalate, and then we'll also have procedures. These are your people, processes, and technologies that you'll typically have in your environment. And then we also have what are referred to as injects. Injects are exactly as they sound. These could be things that make the game more complex and be viewed somewhat as a negative event, or they can make the game easier and give the incident response team, which is you all, better opportunities to solve what the scenario is. So an inject is going to automatically be thrown if we roll a natural 1, a natural 20, or we fail 3 times in a row. Now, we're going to be looking at 2 different versions of the screen in just a moment, but the way the game works is you'll have a base set of procedures that you choose from. These will give you a +3 modifier. You are allowed to choose any of the procedures, but the top row is going to give you more options. Any roll over 11 is a success, and I'll explain why that was a success. And then if it's less than that, obviously it's a fail, and we'll go through why that failed. We have 10 turns to see if we can determine what the full incident cause was. Does anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay. So we're going to pivot, and I'm going to show you 2 different versions of the gameplay options. So first we're going to show the Steam tabletop version, and then we're going to go ahead and play the web-based version for our game today. So let me go ahead and screen share that for you. So this is the Steam Tabletop Simulator version of the game. It comes with all of the expansion decks that you will see online. And this row here in the middle, hopefully you can see that pretty good. The row in the middle is your base people, process, and technology or procedures that you're using in your environment to figure out what's going on. And then up here we have our different attack chain for the scenario. And now we're going to go ahead and pivot to the online version of the game. So on this top row here, these are our base people, processes, technologies, the procedures that we're going to be using to help solve this case. And then on the bottom here are additional tools that we can use. They just don't give us a +3 modifier. And again, we have 10 turns to try and figure out what's going on in this particular scenario. So do we have any questions before we go ahead and begin? Okay, so you are the incident response team. And as it always happens, it's Friday at, after hours, and you are suddenly getting a call out from the help desk saying that they're getting reports that a researcher has found or believes that they have found some of your data online. So that's the level of detail that we have at the moment to start the investigation. So we're going to quickly go around the room to see, we need somebody to be the first. We can either go alphabetical order by the names as I see them on the screen, or we can actually roll the dice and figure out who would like to go first. Which method would you like to choose? Roll the dice or just alphabetical order?
Roll the dice, maybe.
Roll the dice. All right. So
Yeah.
Carlos, we're rolling the dice, and your number is a 10. Malvika, we have 19. That's going to be pretty hard to beat. And then on our next roll, we have a 16. So we're going to go from left to right, Malvika, Mariana, and Carlos, and then we can chime in anything else as needed. All right. So given the information that we have thus far, we have a report of an event into our help desk that there's been data observed that's potentially our company's data. So given the options of what we have here, and let's go over all of those real quick. We have our cloud security information and event SIM. The only difference between this and a regular SIM is you also have cloud logs, right? We have firewall log analysis, endpoint security protection analysis. You're going to see another card that's very similar to that, but I'll explain the differences shortly. Your user and entity behavior analytics, your UEBA. Now, the rest of the cards that you have to select from, there may be duplicates because of how this shows up on the online version. We have software bill of materials and firewall log review. That's the same thing as analysis. So that's our duplicate. Call a consultant, server analysis, security event information, security information and event management. My apologies. Isolation, workload protection, sequence of events analysis, cloud event log analysis, Shodan review, cyber deception. These are going to be your canary tokens, your honey token, your canary processes, honey processes, all of that information. Physical security review, permissions audit, employee interviews, network threat hunting. This is your Ritas, your Zeek, your security onion, consequent driven threat hunting, cloud identity and entitlement management, protocol analysis, crisis management, active defense and cyber deception. This is a combination. This is one of the newest introduced cards. That's going to be the same as our cyber deception that we saw a moment ago. Then we have our endpoint analysis. The difference between this one, in my definition, and the endpoint security protection analysis is your endpoint security protection analysis. Think of this as your EDRs, your Taniums, your CrowdStrikes, your Palos, your OSX, things that you can collect data from it and potentially connect to the device and grab information as needed. Whereas the endpoint analysis, think of this as more physical device or virtual device in hand that you're making a forensically sound image of to continue your analysis that way. Then we have application runtime analysis, memory analysis, and a site walkthrough. You'll notice that most of the cards now also have this competitive price, 2 resource points. That is for the competitive version where you have to spend points, as with most enterprises. You have to be able to purchase your tools and utilize them, right? We're not going to be playing the competitive version today. Any questions on the available procedures? All right. Malvika, you're going to be our first person today. So what would you like to suggest we start with the information that we have available?
Let's start with the cloud SIM based on we
Cloud
get
SIM?
like 3 extra points. Yeah.
Okay, based on 3 points. And what are we hoping to find from the cloud SIM? Just looking for anything general anomalies?
Yeah, for now, just anomalies.
All right. So our cloud SIM, we're going to pick up our dice down here on the bottom, and we're getting a +3. Sadly, there's no actual dice rolling in this particular game. In the Steam player game and the physical card game, you get to actually throw the dice. So The one cool thing about the Steam version is that you can flip the whole table over and just watch everything go flying away. That wasn't as eventful as a flip as normal. Usually it throws everything around, so you get that feeling of angst out of you. All
They
right.
know how to make people feel good, I guess.
Yeah, if you're having an aggravating moment, being able to flip that table over sometimes it just feels great. Or, slam a book on the table, whatever.
Yeah.
Not within the room while management's there, but it helps. All right, so we're going to go ahead and roll our dice, and we have a 4. So we look through our logs, but we don't have a particular time period at the moment that we're looking for to see if there was any evidence of data exfiltrating from our environment to confirm whether or not the report of data being available has been confirmed or not. So what we're going to do now is that makes it Mariana's turn, and you get to select from all of the same procedures. Keep in mind for this particular game, as I said, we're not playing the competitive version. So it's not you only get to use it one time scenario. If we were unsuccessful one time, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will not be successful on the next turn. So any of the cards are available for selection.
Okay, then can I choose employee interviews?
Employee interviews? Okay.
Yeah.
Who are we going to interview in this particular case? We just had the report of a researcher external to us saying that they found data, right? Would we be trying to interview everybody within the company, or would we be trying to make a smaller group?
Yeah, we would try to make a smaller group. I mean, if the researchers are talking, I guess, to stakeholders or to project managers, or
these
to
are
whom?
external researchers. They are not employees of the company. So some third party external to the company has reported this.
Yeah, but to whom did they report it to inside the company? They have contact with the
They
project
just reported
manager?
it to they reported it through the CERT, through the company incident response. There's typically ways to report events listed on your enterprise or corporation website to tell you how to reach out to. If you do have an issue, you call this phone number or email this particular group. So in this case, it's going to be our CERT, our help desk, basically.
Okay. Well, then, yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, I'm not sure then who would I interview?
Well, I think maybe we can see if we can contact the researcher back, even though that's not specifically one of the cards we have, right? Maybe the researcher has now given us a little bit more information about what the data contains, right? So we're seeing that there's a report that maybe there was an Active Directory file that appears to be from our company. So now we have a little bit more specifics, right? Okay. So what would we like to select to look at next?
Could I take protocol analysis?
That's a great choice, right?
Okay.
And this will allow us to be able to see, do we have any, were there any ports or applications that were able to go through our firewall that maybe are either unknown to our environment or maybe shouldn't have been able to leave the environment in the first place, right? Like maybe SMB shouldn't be allowed to reach externally, for example, right? So we can use protocol analysis for that. Do we have any difference of opinion? Anybody want to suggest anything differently? Okay, that one is only going to be a regular dice roll. So let's move this over here where I can actually see it and roll the dice. We got a number 1. So now we have an inject, and that's going to be the great things that we get to see here. These are our injects. Hopefully this will give us something a little bit additional to help us through. And here we go. We're going to draw our inject. And this particular card says that it was a false alarm. It was a pen test. Now, for the scenario that I've technically set up for us today, this is not necessarily going to be accurate. This is based on a real world event, but we're going to go ahead and use it just to be able to see what the injects look like and their purpose on the gameplay. But because I also typically play a modified version, especially for those new to cyber, interested in cyber, or maybe earlier in the career, we're going to go ahead and flip over the first card to give a little bit more information into the scenario to help drive the rest of the gameplay. So what we know at the moment is, even though these cards, the cards are used in interpretations of what the actual event was. So when we get to the final card and we summarize what this event was based on, it's not going to be an exact match one-for-one scenario. I will interpret cards if the specific thing I'm looking for that's related to the event is not available. So in this case, we have a dual-homed device where an operator was connected to a workstation directly to the internet via a secondary network interface. So one of the follow-up questions that we might have after the fact, right, to be able to identify the gaps in our policies and procedures would be something like, if this device was connected to a second network or used a second network interface, would we be able to detect that, or would we have any data? So with that being said, Vika, what would you like to select as our next procedure? And we've only got 3 cards to go and 8 turns remaining, so we're doing great so far, and only 1 inject.
So what we have right now is that basically one of the hosts was connected to a different network. That's all we found.
Correct. We have that the host was connected to a different network, and that in this case, it was viewable via Shodan because the protocol or their internal network that they were connected to wasn't as defended or as restricted as it would be in an enterprise environment.
Okay, so like you said, the next thing would be figuring out the policies. If we can figure out, if we can.
No, the question was like a lessons learned after the fact.
Okay.
Would we be able to see this data? Do we have policies in place to block using a second, let's say you have a secondary NIC, a hardwired NIC, for example, would we be able to detect that? Or even if we plugged in a second USB wireless or something of that nature. And then I'm also going to briefly show these are the consultant cards. They're exactly as they sound. They give us a community expert who can typically help us to solve the scenario. Usually when the injects are thrown, this is a potential to be able to use for the gameplay mechanics itself and to help us solve what the situation is. And then we also have one of the cards on the bottom. We should have a call a consultant in here. There we go. We have call a consultant that we can choose as well. Sometimes though, in your particular corporation or company, the capability to reach out to a consultant may depend upon retainers and internal NDAs and other agreements with external parties before you can actually reach out to them. So we know we have potentially have data in the dark web. It seems to be related to Active Directory. We have an individual's system that was apparently basically connected to the enterprise network, as well as their own home, or let's even say Starbucks network. What we'd like to do to start in the rest of the scenario to solve it.
Yeah, so I'm a little confused if I should like maximize my chances based on like played as a game or played like, oh, what will we do next in an incident?
It's a little of both, right? So in an incident, depending upon your company or enterprise, right, you have specific processes that you and playbooks that you would typically run through in this scenario, given the information that you have at hand, right? Now, keep in mind that in our people, processes, and technologies listed in our detections, our procedures here, those may not be all inclusive and have everything that you would have at your disposal in an enterprise environment, for example, right? But based on the information you have and your general knowledge of incident response, where do you think is the best tool to use to try and figure out what's going on in this case and to get additional telemetry and data to help us figure out what's going on? Would you like me to go through some of the cards again if you can't see them? I can do that.
Sorry, I can see them. It's just there's so many that like I'm trying to find one.
Just keep in mind the major difference we have, right, is on the top row. This gives us a +3. And these I will use for this first row for most occasions. These are going to be the typical tools that you might see in any environment, right? You're typically going to have some kind of endpoint security product. You'll may or may not have a UEBA, but a lot of large enterprises do have that. And then you'll have your SIMs.
Right. So we already have one card open that's from endpoint security. And so I'm thinking we should go firewall log analysis, which would sort of maximize both like the game and the incident response.
That makes sense. So we're going to go with firewall analysis because we have the fact that the user's device, which was connected to a non-enterprise network, right? Think of your Starbucks or your home networks. We're going to look through our firewall logs to see if we can find any evidence of activity there, right?
Yes.
Would that be correct? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And we're going to go ahead and roll that. Do we have any other feedback or suggestions? A 20. All right. That means we get to first. I'm going to flip over our next card. So we're 7 turns in, and we're going to have another inject. So our next piece of information that we know is now we know that our high level is we had an external third-party researcher state that they found what they believe to be data of ours on the dark web. They also stated we've also figured out with our log review that the individual's host was dual homed, connected to both the enterprise network and their local home network, or at the same time, not on the VPN, but they're able to split it. So 2 different connections to 2 different networks, and that host was able to be viewed via the internet, direct internet via Shodan, and attackers use that to gain access to that additional device. What we also know now from looking at the firewall log analysis and additional logs is we've had local privilege escalation. So now we know that there was a misconfiguration or vulnerability that allowed this adversary to gain administrative privilege. Now you'll also notice that on all of the majority of the attack vector cards, you'll have the detection, and then you'll have tools, and typically you'll also have links. Now the detections, they're not all inclusive, neither are the tools, because the card itself is a limited space. So even though it suggests that the only way to detect this is endpoint analysis, consequence-driven threat hunting, and UEBA, if you can logically talk through the card that you have selected, the procedure that you've selected, and the dice agrees, then it can be successful. And then we also have lists of tools that can help you to emulate these particular types of attacks to use in validating what you do or do not see in your current log set. All right, and now we need to select our inject, which is this time a threat researcher at Huntress has disclosed the 0-day vulnerability in the Defender's business critical software package, and it must be addressed immediately. So now, in essence, we have just lost a turn. So now we have one less turn to figure out what is the scenario, what do we have going on. So now we're down to 6. So Carlo, that makes it your turn. So what we know so far, to reiterate, is we had a researcher, external third party, say that they found information available that they believe is our data. It looks like it may be Active Directory. We have discovered that there was a dual home device and that local privilege escalation has apparently taken place. So the adversary has gained privileged access within our environment. What would you like to suggest as our next procedure?
What are the steps again?
Well, our +3 are going to be our SIM, firewall log analysis, endpoint security protection analysis. Those are going to be your EDRs, your MDRs, and I can't remember the other EDR, but these are going to be your OSSEC, your CrowdStrikes, your Taniums, your Palos, your Wazoo. Right, we have UEBA, we have software bill of materials, firewall log, that's the same as firewall log analysis, call a consultant, server analysis, isolation, workload protection. I'm skipping events that are duplicate cards in case you're wondering. Sequence of events analysis, cloud log analysis, Shodan review, physical security review, permissions audit, employee interviews, network threat hunting, consequent-driven threat hunting, protocol analysis, crisis management, active defense and cyber deception. This is going to be your honey tokens, your your canary tokens, your honeypots, your honey tokens, your honey accounts. Endpoint analysis. This is going to be more like whether it's a virtual device or a physical device, getting a forensically sound image of it to perform additional analysis. We have application runtime analysis, memory analysis, and a site walkthrough. Again, the top row gives us the +3 automatic. And we have 2 cards to go, and we've solved what this scenario is, which I'll go into more details at the end.
Awesome. I have to choose how many?
1.
I'll go with endpoint.
Endpoint security protection analysis, correct?
Yes.
All right. Anything in particular we're going to look for in the tool? See if maybe there was some admin usage on a laptop or server that has not previously been observed, something of that nature.
Exactly. Unusual activity.
Unusual activity. All right. So we got our dice roll. We have an 8 plus a 3, which is an 11. Awesome. So we were able to observe within our endpoint security protection analysis that we're seeing misuse of remote access software. We're seeing software that are not typical for our environment, TeamViewer, AnyDesk, Screen Connect, as the method of exfiltrating. So now that brings us back to Mariana, I believe.
Yep.
All right. And we're on our last card. So we're doing great. And then I'll explain what this particular scenario, again, I'll explain what this particular scenario was. And we'll go over some high level lessons learned, as well as, tabletop, rather discussion questions that we may want to bring back to our own organizations to find out if we have any gaps or if we have any detection methods, or either blocking methods. So what would you like to choose from for this particular, to figure out what the next step was, the persistence mechanism used in this case? I rely on closed captioning, just to let you know, because I'm hard of hearing, but I think you're looking for some suggestions, right? So we know that we've got the remote software. So we would probably want to look to see within our environment, number one, do we have those types of remote software? AnyDesk, TeamViewer, Screen Connect. There's probably 50 different ones right now. Log Me In, all of these type of tools. If we don't use them in our environment, then it's going to be pretty obvious in our SIM, potentially in our EDR, if we see those applications running or in use. So we could potentially look at either the SIM, we could look at endpoint security protection analysis, potentially UEBA, if it's a application that the user has never ran before. So we have a couple of different options.
Thank you. Then I will go for the endpoint security protection analysis. Makes more sense, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to dig through our environment and see, do we see any of these remote access tools, especially if they're not something that are typical within our environment or not authorized in our environment. So we go to our dice and we have another 11 plus 3. We got 14. So now we come to our final card, and I'll explain what the scenario was based on. So we have, from the persistence mechanism in this case, that the attackers created a secondary set of credentials for this user, which the detections you might be able to see, second accounts with your UEBA, your SIM, and other things. So from the analysis, or rather from the gameplay that we just worked through, what this particular scenario is based on is the Cisco 2022 breach. And in that particular breach, an employee was, their personal Google account had been compromised through social engineering. That Google account in their browser, they were syncing data and credentials and passwords, and the adversary was able to have access to their corporate credentials, allowing them to be able to try and connect to the VPN. They also used voice phishing, claiming to be from IT, as well as MFA fatigue attacks, continuously sending push notifications to that user until they finally get annoyed enough to just click yes, accept, so they don't get any more alerts. This allowed them to be able to access the corporation via VPN. Once they were in, they enrolled additional devices into MFA, created backdoor accounts, and moved laterally through the network. At one point, they were able to successfully escalate their privileges and gain access to Citrix servers, Citrix infrastructure. They then performed all kinds of reconnaissance commands, looking for tools such as, or rather utilizing tools AD Find, which will help map out the fastest path to access Active Directory, secrets dumping to dump passwords, and then NTDS, which is your domain controller, the holy grail of all of the passwords and credentials for the enterprise, looking at utilities for that. They ultimately were able to gather, or rather to make that privilege escalation, right, and access the Citrix. But they were able to successfully exfiltrate a box file share, kind of like your Google Drive or your OneDrive, right, where there was some data within that, but that was apparently unrelated to company as a whole. It was more of the personal individual's box account, so nothing in there. They did not rely on any malware or any exportation of 0 days, and they didn't deploy the ransomware that is typical of this adversary. This adversary is sometimes attributed back to UNC 2447 and Lapsus and a few others. Some of our lessons learned based on this scenario, what are some of the things that you would suggest are things we would want to do going forward within our environment for this particular scenario, real world scenario? Is there anything you'd like to suggest? There's a few things I have in mind, and we'll get to those in a moment, but I'm going to see if anybody else has any suggestions first.
Maybe some user training, like reporting too many push messages instead of, because if people had reported the push message, they would not have gotten the access.
Exactly. Right? That's definitely one thing. Reporting, ensuring that our employees know how to report. What about detections? Maybe we have within our logs, we're getting the MFA logs, and we're able to see those repetitious events and attempts to utilize those codes. Maybe we replace application-based, push-based MFA where feasible with a hard token or a FIDO key or something of that nature. Maybe even certificate-based. That's one method. Disabling any internal methods that are susceptible to MFA fatigue. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that's another thing. Geolocation is always thrown around as potential mechanisms, but geolocation is typically also only as good as your internal geodata. Sometimes it's not as accurate as you may think, especially if the adversary is using anonymizers or proxying type tools, using public VPNs. However, those in and of themselves may be another way that you can detect that these are not actually the user making these requests, preventing synchronization credentials to personal accounts. So in this particular case, the individual user synced information from their Chrome browser, which allowed them to be, they were socially engineered, or their credentials may have been obtained from prior data breaches. Those personal credentials were then used to gather their enterprise credentials from the browser and from those backups in their Google account. Maybe restricting the capability, or number one, restricting what browsers are available within our corporation, making sure individuals can't log into a personal account, right? They use password managers where needed or where feasible. Ideally, I understand that this is, where feasible, and sometimes it's not always 100% doable, but keep the personal and work related, right? Blocking synchronization of corporate information to the cloud, strengthening the identity monitoring, right? Like we already said, the excessive MFA requests, or detecting new MFA enrollment for those individuals, especially if they happen to be mobile device type that you have either previously not seen for this particular individual, or you haven't seen it within your own environment. You may typically see, or in your logs, everybody's used to seeing iPhone, Android, and to a smaller extent, Microsoft. But if you're seeing things like SDKs and other virtual devices, those might not be something that you typically have in your environment. So that could be able to be used for alerting mechanisms to say, hey, something's going on here. Impossible travel goes along with the geolocation, right? Can't be in two places at once. If the user has any kind of administrative level access activities that is not typical for their job, role, or function, that may be something else that we could detect and alert on. So from a discussion standpoint, we've got a couple more for lessons learned, but let me go from a discussion standpoint, right? Bringing back to enterprise, some questions you might want to come back with are, how quickly could we detect those repeated MFA pushes? What are some other things that you think would be great things to bring back to your enterprise to ask to see, do we have the right tools or the right data or the right policies to help us prevent this particular scenario? Okay. What about if in this particular case, the adversary connected over the VPN, over the corporate VPN to the network? But what's not clear from the information and can potentially be presumed or assumed is that VPN connection was more than likely through some type of adversarial controlled device. So how would we, or potentially could have been the user's device as well, but how could we identify and contain an attack if they're successfully coming through our VPN? Do we have the people and processes, procedures in place to know who do we need to reach out to kill that VPN session or revoke the token, what have you? And then, for example, since this was related to ransomware groups, what is our response for or process for responding to those extortion attempts for ransomware, even though it wasn't necessarily deployed? In this particular case, I believe the articles suggest that there were demands for payment being made, but ransomware itself had not actually been deployed. Any questions? Any additional feedback or anything else you could think of that would probably be good, something good to bring back to your enterprise or consider for future attack vectors, detection methods, blocking methods?
The thing you said about like geo anomaly detection, so like use of VPN and stuff like that, that is really good because I think a lot of login stuff like cloud logins do use geolocation as a way of making sure that the person isn't like for identity and stuff. Making sure that there's no like VPNs would be great, like public VPNs, I mean.
Yeah, so potentially there are always limitations, right? But
Mhm.
you might be able to prevent and block connections to your network if the source traffic is originating from a public VPN or an anonymizer or a Tor node for that matter, right? That way you could hopefully be able to see, number one, true IP, so you can make sure it's the authorized, authentic person that's connecting. It could be useful for your UEBA detections as well. And then you can hopefully prevent those types of connections from being successful and getting into your environment. Multiple different detections and preventions within just that one thing. What about moving away from even though this says MFA, SMS as MFA, right? Or even particular applications as MFA, moving to hard tokens or, FIDOs or YubiKeys instead. That requires a physical device being connected to your computer. So you would have to have both the key and the computer in order to be able to access the enterprise. That's another potential blocking mechanism.
For this, I have a question. So, like a physical key for ultra secure facilities or for people who are really high up in the chain, I get, but if we're giving everyone the keys and there are potential of people losing the key or it being stolen.
Yes, there is always that potential, but we also have to now obviously, the ultimate authority is going to be the business, right? And from a business perspective, your GRC and your business management teams will have to make a decision on, is the risk of compromise and the risk of data being stolen is that higher than the cost of providing those different hardware tokens to the individuals across your enterprise, whether or not they're turned back in or lost. So it's kind of a balance, and it's going to be very much a management business decision.
In your experience, how common is it for there to be like hardware tokens instead of just other forms of MFA, like push messages?
Most corporations that I'm familiar with and have past experience with are all moving to physical tokens. And when you order those types of devices in bulk, they're usually much, much cheaper than for like an individual purchase. So the value of securing the enterprise and lowering the risk for potential breach and data exfiltration very much outweighs the cost of purchasing those devices and having them on hand.
Awesome, thanks. So like, sorry, one more question.
Certainly.
In my university, we were using MFA for students. So in that case, would you say like for students, it's good enough to have just push notifications, but for the staff, especially like who are working in security and have higher level access, you would need a hard token?
That would depend upon what they're accessing, right? If you're
Okay.
accessing servers, HR data, payroll data, and ultimately, again, it's going to be more of a business decision, right? They would have to determine their crown jewels, what are the more critical systems, and then utilize tokens for logging in and connecting from those. But those would typically also require you, right? Thinking of an enterprise situation, would require you to be on the network and not just the general internet Wi-Fi or something, right?
Thank you so much, Robin.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I hope you enjoyed the game that we set up today, and I hope you enjoyed I hope you enjoyed Backdoors and Breaches as a whole and will utilize it in the future and going forward for either showcasing to your current enterprises, future enterprises, or just sharing it with your friends and entertaining, right? It's a very cool tool to use to understand what actions you might take in an incident investigation without having to have a real one taking place right in front of you.
Thank you. I found it a great way to learn because I'm new to the field. I mean, it's very interactive, and I feel like if anything I learned through this would stay in my brain longer than just reading about it.
Awesome. I have also seen that one of the advantages of tabletop scenarios is it can help you to build the relationships and bring in the correct parties ahead of events. So you have your legal department, your HR, right? Your help desk, your network SMEs, or your incident responders. You have all of these different teams focused on a single topic in an area where it's not a live event, right? So you have the time to make those plans and build those relationships so that should a true event happen in the future, you already know who to reach out to. They already know their role and responsibility, and you have that coordination and that plan in place ahead of time. And it allows additional teams to understand. Some may not quite understand some of the things that happen during an incident, right? So your HR folks, for example, they might not understand everything that you would have to do and go through for investigating something. And it allows them the opportunity to ask questions and better understand what's going on.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, makes sense.
Well, thank you very much. And have a great rest of your day. And
Thank
maybe
you.
I'll see
You
you all
too.
again next time.
Yeah, if you host any games, I will ask Carlo for your contact. I would love to join these games. I found it very instructional. So thank you.
You're welcome. You have a great day.